Okay, any questions about how? Now, the other one is, how do you access the recording? Let's say you weren't here, or you were here and you say, hey, there's something I didn't quite get in that lesson. I want to go to, I think it was in the middle of the middle of the session. How do you get to the recording?
You go to the website.
Yeah, there's two ways. You go on that Friday, we all get that Friday and Sunday morning email. The Friday morning email, right under the announcement of the Sunday school class, there is a black button that says previously recorded Sunday school
No, they
information.
I tried that and they're like weeks ago and I can't get the current one,
Well,
most recent one.
no, they're there. You might have to scroll.
They're not in order?
I don't think they are. Well, when I go in there in order, but sometimes I've gone in and they aren't in order. So you just have to scroll and try to find the one you want. The other way to do it is go to the website and then you just scroll down. And I think you have to scroll down through a lot of announcements and you're looking for a yellow button that says the same thing, previously recorded Sunday school classes.
In other words, Becky, don't miss.
Yeah. Well, it's really not that hard if you do it all.
Right.
Yeah,
Don't miss it.
the more often you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
If you want to get there, hopefully you'll get
Doesn't Jeff know how to do it?
Oh,
there. Okay, well, if you have any questions, call me. All right, we're working with John 2. We're still on the handout. Now, remember, in John chapter 2 to 12, this is where the basic ministry of Jesus takes place. I've argued that the ministry of Jesus begins with the wedding at Cana, where he turns the water into wine. Chapter 1 is kind of a prologue. It sets the stage. His ministry begins with chapter 2. And then he really doesn't do any healings or anything like that after chapter 12. From 13 on to 17, he's talking to the disciples. And then from 18 to 20, you have the crucifixion and the resurrection account. And then in 21, morning, beautiful.
Good morning.
And chapter 21. What?
Morning, dear.
Oh, beautiful was good.
Thank you.
she can do better.
Oh, she does just fine.
I'm embarrassed because I'm late, but I want you to know, I was here at 9:13, but I had to stand away from home. So there you go.
Oh.
And you just got a rich cookie to have.
You were also focusing like Dave, how I came in, when I got my Bible, the cookie went in my mouth and I walked because I thought, so you were being very careful on not spilling your coffee.
There you go. So you're here. That's the important thing. And yeah, some people come in late. That's fine. Some people have to leave early. That's fine. I'd rather you be here anytime you can. So in John 2 to 12, we have 7 miracles, 7 signs, and they're listed here in your handout. I have them numbered. And I also have the occurrences. The Greek word for sign, as you remember, is semeion. And we're also concerned with how often John uses the word semeion in this unit of chapters 2 to 12, because that gives us the clue as to what these signs mean and how the people are interpreting these signs, how they're viewing them and how the leaders are viewing them. So we go through each sign, then we look at each occurrence of semeion and we keep going. So we are at I think it's the 4th sign, the feeding of the 5,000. Now, this is one miracle, not probably the only one. Well, maybe the only one that all 4 gospels include. Because the next miracle we're going to work on is Jesus walking on the water. Luke doesn't have that one. Matthew and Mark have Jesus walking on the water. But the feeding of the 5,000, all 4 gospels have that one. So that would have been something that would have been in all of the oral traditions preceding each gospel. Matthew, where do I have that? In Matthew 14, you have his account, Matthew's account of feeding the 5,000, Mark 6, and Luke 9. And then you have it here in John 6, 1-15. Sometimes the word semeion, the word sign, is, John uses that word in these miracles or signs. Sometimes he won't. Like the one we finished with last week, the third sign, which was the healing of the man who couldn't walk, the healing of the lame man. Semeion wasn't in that story at all, as we find out later on when it's not in a story that we consider to be a miracle sign in these 11 chapters. One might use the word sign to refer to it later. So whether or not it's used in the story itself isn't of utmost importance. But it's used twice in this story. 6:2. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs, the miracles. What does the NLT say?
Miraculous signs.
Miraculous signs. So we talked about that. King James has miracles. That's how they're translating semeion. Semeion has a miracle nuance, because we know that from King James. The New Living Translation is more of a comprehensive translation of it. It says miraculous signs, because John's calling it signs, and that's what most of the rest of the translations have, miraculous or just signs. And you might have to, especially, you might have to make a leap for ourselves that a semeion, a sign, is actually a miracle. That's how it's translated. So a large crowd kept following, and they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Turning the changing of water into wine, not healing of the sick. But the second sign was the healing of the official's son, he was sick, and the healing of the man who couldn't walk, he was sick. So we
But
have
couldn't there
these
be other
two
signs that
examples.
aren't mentioned here?
Yes, and we've talked about that. That we don't. I think John is giving us 7 maybe prime examples, and then it says in chapter 20, there were much more signs that Jesus did that aren't included in this book. So, and we talked about that when we got to sign number 2, the healing of the official son. And it talked about signs plural. Well, up to that point, John only had one sign, turning of the water into wine. So we do think there are other signs. John just only had 7, because when you look at the other gospels, there are more than 7. And that's why this is, these chapters 2 to 12 are so important, because he's not all over the place. He's focused. He wants us to know about these signs and what these signs mean. And these signs point to God, they point to him, and they're supposed to inspire belief. And that's what these signs are all about. And that's what John's all about in these chapters, these 11 chapters, 1 to 12. So we keep going with this story. You're familiar with this story because you read it in the other 3 gospels. Now, the way John tells it, when Jesus saw the crowd, it was a large crowd. And he decided to test Philip by asking where they're going to get enough food to feed the people. And Philip says, well, it would take probably more than 6 months' wages to feed this many people. And then Andrew says, well, you do have 5 loaves and we have 2 fish. And then Jesus tells the disciples to get the people to sit down. Then he gave thanks with the food that he had. And he distributed, according to John, what does John say here?
Who took the loaves and gave bread?
They could have as much as they wanted.
Verse 11.
Verse 11. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them, this is my translation, to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. In the other 3 gospels, Jesus gives the bread and the fish to the disciples, and they distribute it to the crowd. Here, Jesus distributes the food to the crowd. Now, that would have taken a long time for one person to do that. So it's not to say that Jesus didn't give it to the disciples to distribute to the crowd. But John says this, in my opinion, because in John, it's all about Jesus. He gives thanks, which he did in the other 3 gospels, but John has him giving food to the crowd.
Well, if we can make all that food, distributing it should have been easy.
That's what I was thinking.
There you
That's
go.
what I was thinking when I read this. He just would have gone like that, like Q in the Q continuum on Star Trek. Just like that, and bang, there they are. It's done. Oh, yeah, but the point is, I think it's all about Jesus when it comes to John. The focus is Jesus, and the focus is on his divinity and the way he's able to do things, where in some of the other gospels, especially Mark, you'll notice Jesus will do a miracle and then he'll say, don't tell anyone. Don't have that here, John. Do a miracle, that's a sign, people are supposed to believe, that's a big deal. And then we go on to the next one. So that's where we are.
Dave, I have a question about the verse 12. He told his disciples to gather up fragments. 12 baskets. What was going to happen with those?
Where do you see 12 baskets?
Or 13.
13.
Oh, there they go. And the question again was, what happened
were
to
they
them?
what were they going to do with that food in the 12 baskets?
The text doesn't say, I don't think, in any of the gospels. And that question does come up, well, what happened to the 12 baskets?
So
Well,
many people you can also materialize that.
what do you think would have happened to them?
Feed the poor.
Yeah, I don't think they would have thrown them out, they would have, you know,
We
'cause-
just distribute them among the people
yeah,
that could use it. Once.
could have been the poor, but,
It
you
could have
know,
been the
if
same
we have
people got hungry.
a gathering and there's food left over, we give it to people to take home.
But wasn't the point, not only did they have enough, they had more than enough.
That was the point, yeah.
Absolutely.
So and none of the text doesn't say what happened to it. The point was, you start with 5 loaves and 2 fish. You have enough to feed either 5,000 or 4,000. And you have 12, 13 baskets. I think it's 12 in this, 12 baskets left over. So that's the miracle. So you have the miracle that he's able to feed the crowd. And then the miracle continues in the sense that you have 12 baskets left over. Now, remember, 12 is it's a special number in the biblical text. You have the 12 tribes of Israel, you have 12 disciples, we have 12 loaves left over. It's
Could you
key.
check my chair and see if it's plugged in all the way? Sorry.
I came without a computer.
I think
She is.
I know, but computer.
Her chair.
Dave, one other question, there's been a lot of discussion about how many people were there, and in verse 10, it says that. Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. So if there were 5,000 men, how many women and children were there? So the crowd was much bigger than 5,000.
Yeah.
Or is that, does that men refer to the people?
No, I need to find that.
What's the minimum?
NIV.
It's 10.
Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now, there was a great deal of grass, so they, and I have a footnote. They, meaning the men, sat down about 5,000 in all. So,
David, mine says the men alone.
yeah, so we don't know. As we read the Greek, it says the men. Now, what my translation did, it went, now, did it go inclusive to, because if you go inclusive, which my translation did, it should have translated the Greek as the men. So then, if that's the case, we figure there were women and children, so it would have been more.
On mine, verse 10 says make the people sit down.
Okay,
If it's only the men sit down and then he says later, but they give food to the people that are seating, does that mean the people that are standing don't get food?
there you go. I'll answer your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
But it said everyone was full.
But why would they clarify that the people that were sitting got fed? What did that?
Okay, help me out with that.
That's in verse 11, Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted.
Okay,
Did the same to the fish.
well, we need to
With
go
the
back.
fish.
Mine doesn't even say that.
No.
What
What was
version?
the Greek, what
I
was the
always-
original Greek term? Yeah, because mine said it was only to the men who were seated.
It's the New International Version.
Yeah, we're a lot alike. What is your version?
Mine's international.
NIV. Yeah, that's what it says.
Make the people sit down. Now, there's a great deal of grass in this place, so they sat down about 5,000 in all.
Hey, they're all translated from Greek.
Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Well, I guess I'm assuming they were all seated.
Why would the Greeks say the men were seated then?
Yeah, King James made men sit down.
Mm-hmm.
Was there like you know how like,
Men sat down.
was there like a cultural norm, like who ate first back then? Like I know now we're always like, oh, women and children, but like, was it?
Not in the South,
Not in the
it's
South?
the men and the children and the women.
That's a bummer.
And then did they always be seated when they ate? Is that always the custom to be seated?
Well, I mean, now, I don't know, in a house, yes, but in a crowd, and I was looking at some of these stories in the other translations. Some of them say it was nice green grass. So they sat down in a nice green grass, so.
Well, that's crowd control. You get a group to sit down. Man, I taught school long enough. To sit down, you have some control.
Now, in some of the other, stories in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, some of them say that they were divided in groups of 50 and maybe groups of 100.
That's even more
And
control.
that's crowd control, guys, right? So it was more structured, so, they just sat down. Now, if we wanna, Peggy, you said you wanted to know what the Greek said. What, in what
Well, I was just-
verse?
Well, the one.
We know
where
it
there-
said men.
Did it actually use the term men, or was that the interpretation? The interpreters used that it was men, which of course then goes back to the fact women were property. We weren't considered people who were property.
That's more of a biblical myth. In no way were women equal to men, but they were not considered to be property. That is 18th century, early 19th century
Victorian.
biblical interpretation. William Barclay was big on that, saying that women were property. But as I've done work in the Hebrew Bible, I've taught Hebrew Bible and ethics, and I spent a couple sessions on the family. In public, the man was definitely considered to be the authority in the household, but when you are looking at what's the right word? A subsistence farming community, there is definitely a partnership between the men and the women. And so, and women did, just like in even sometimes today, women have a lot of authority when it comes to basic decisions in the household, especially when it comes to food and stuff like that. But so I will, you know, I think we have to be careful, you
Okay,
know,
well,
when
thanks,
we-
I mean, that was always.
about considering them to be property. And again, when I thought, much was fix this. But when we say that, that what I say, women weren't necessarily treated as property. I'm not, and again, I'm no way saying that they were treated as.
Right.
Okay, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get to the Greek. I have some software here. It's not working on this computer, whatever reason, I'm figuring that out.
I guess it really doesn't matter what the word is, because different people have different opinions on how the word gets translated.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter which exactly the word there is, it's.
And that's back to the translation discussion.
Do you think there's even a
And
reason?
so the question is, were there just 5,000 men? And if there were only 5,000 men, then we assume there would have been more. And then did the term 5,000 mean to include, was it inclusive of that? Ally?
Oh, why are they even talking about people sitting down? And that's, you know, like, why would that even be mentioned?
Crowd control.
Well, Donna said.
Is that just it?
You know, when
I
people
thought that
get angry, so you had hangry people.
And
Well,
hands reaching
calm
out.
down.
Well, when we eat, don't we sit?
Yeah.
Do we stay standing or do we?
Right, but like if I was writing a story about Thanksgiving, and I was like, oh, we all eat pumpkin pie, I wouldn't be like, we all sat down. I don't know, like I just am curious why that
We
was
sat
like.
down at the table.
Yeah, but what she's inference, why are they bringing it in
It
the,
doesn't actually matter, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that was custom, when
Customary,
you eat, you sit down. Donna had, a speculative answer saying, well, that's crowd control, and we saw that come up in the other versions of the story in the Gospels where they were divided into groups and then they sat down, so it's just a way to organize things. If you have, 5,000 people running around, it's going to be hard to serve it.
And I see it kind of as a preparation for a meal. You know, so when the meal's ready, I'll say, okay, everybody sit down. You know, sit down, and now we're gonna pray.
Yes,
And so he said, sit down, and then he prayed, and then they ate.
yeah,
But-
remember the order, keep going, no interrupting.
No, that's okay, but if, you know, if he just starts handing out food and everybody's willy-nilly, it's not as much of a formal as I am feeding you.
Okay,
That's just kind of.
no,
how I see it.
and I wanna pick up on that, so they have the food. And then, we have 5 loaves, we have 2 fish, and then Jesus says, have the people sit down. To me, that's the beginning of the miracle, you have 5 loaves and 2 fish, then you have them sit down, so there's a progression here.
And then they were quiet and
Yeah,
listened.
they sit down, they're quiet,
there's no.
If they wanted to hear Jesus give thanks, now 5,000 people, that's a long.
That's a miracle in itself.
Yeah, that's a miracle in and of itself, and it could have been an exaggerated number, I'm just saying, it's possible. I mean, and you know, it's not 5,003, it's not 5,036, it's not 4,998, it's 5,000, so it's a round number. And then there are two examples in Matthew and Mark where it occurs, this story occurs again, and it's 4,000. So
In other words,
4,000,
it's a
5,000.
big crowd.
Yeah,
The
the
number is
biblical text, yeah,
big.
yeah, we're not so much concerned about the exact numbers. The point is, it was a large crowd,
I mean, how would they have even known the exact number?
exactly.
Was someone sitting up there counting the whole
Exactly.
time?
Yeah, we didn't have a helicopter flying around and, doing, ground control.
But David,
Yeah, go ahead.
this whole looking at what we're doing right now,
Mhm.
when we get lost in the weeds, and we're getting lost in the weeds.
Okay,
Yes.
Have we lost the story?
yes,
Are we not to look, is looking at details worth our time, or is looking at details unnecessary in order to see the story and the meaning that John wanted to give us?
yes.
I get in trouble. Lost in the weeds is not my thing. I wanna know the point.
Yeah, and it's both. So sometimes details are important, but yes, we can get lost in the weeds. Now, I don't want that to discourage us from asking questions, because then it can bring us back, which is what I'm trying to do. When we look at what's going on, we have the food, they sit down, Jesus gives thanks, and then I think Becky said, or someone said they were going to be quiet. Yeah, if they want to hear Jesus pray, they'll be quiet. Then there starts to be some order to get ready for this miracle. And then the food is distributed, and we don't know how that,
But somewhere in there, it occurs to the people, this is a little unusual.
yes.
Something's happening.
So you have food, you're sitting down, Jesus gives thanks, he distributes the food to the crowd. The other people, in the other gospels, he gives the food to the disciples to distribute to the crowd. And then that's your miracle, it takes off in some miraculous way. Everyone is fed.
To have leftovers.
Everyone is fed, and we have enough with so many leftovers, much more than what we began. So that is the point. Yeah, we can't get lost in the weeds. We want to be curious. We want to ask these questions, but then, you know, it's my job to bring us back.
I think Donna's point is very well taken. And I think that's the definition of legalism, is getting lost in the weeds. You know, was it 5,000? Was it, you know, but the big idea, the theme is the miracle. And that's what we want to know about.
Yeah.
What is legalism?
I understand that
You just said,
yeah, I can hear people disagree on minute things
Yeah.
when the picture is forgotten.
Legalism is, you know, somebody says, the Bible says it was 5,000 and it's 5,000. The Bible said it, I believe it, and that's good enough for me,
Yeah, and
you know?
you remember I said earlier, well, it's a round number. So it just means it was a large crowd.
I've just never heard that word
And the
before.
legal,
Oh,
yeah, legalism to the Bible is when, you know, when they do quibble about the details in a sense to say that it was, if it says 5,000, then that's definitely the number. And we're saying, no, it's just a large crowd. And then 12 baskets left over. Was it 12, or do the gospel writers say it was 12 because 12 was an important number? So it's important. So if we're able to look at it that way, but a legalistic viewpoint would say, no, definitely 12.
I have a question. Verse,
This is gonna take us in the weeds, anime?
well, Well, I don't know.
Hannah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Verse 14, it says, is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Is that before he was declared the Messiah, or is this John speaking as the prophet? I mean, Jesus is the prophet.
Well, what's going on here and is, they're trying to figure out who Jesus is. They don't know yet.
Okay.
Because here's a prophet, we get to another place, not so much a miracle, but when the signs, the word Samaean comes up and they're saying, well, Jesus does this, the Messiah would certainly do much more. So they're trying to, in this instance and in that instance, they're trying to figure out who this guy is. He's telling them,
Okay.
I'm from God. I'm it. You don't have to look any further. He's telling them this all throughout these chapters, 2 to 12. And it's hard.
It's a matter of believing.
It's a matter of believing. And then at the end, when we get to chapter 12, the crowd stopped believing. We'll get there. But so in verse 2 of chapter 6, we had the 7th occurrence of Samael. Then in 14, which Anna, you brought to us, when the people saw the sign that he had done, meaning the feeding of the crowd, they began to say, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. And what did they mean by that? There are all kinds of prophets, but I don't think they meant Messiah. Maybe some did when they heard that. Maybe some didn't. But again, the point of this is that they're trying to figure out who this guy is. He's turning water into wine. Who's healing sick sons. Who's healing people who can't walk. And who's feeding large crowds of people with only a few loaves of bread and a few fish. Who is this guy?
Yeah.
Okay, now we get to the next, any questions on the feeding of the?
I always thought when Jesus was in front of people, he kind of used it as a teachable moment. You know, like telling parables but this, he just, everybody got fed and then he turned and left.
But that's it.
Yeah, but then what, that's it.
I mean, that's
That's the moment.
that's the moment.
But then what do you say about people say, well, the real miracle of this was he got people to share their food with each other. And that's how everybody was fed.
That's a supposition.
What was that?
Oh, we're a lot of, I mean, it's an interpretation, it's a supposition. I mean, remember, I keep saying when we have a question, what does the text say? And then the text is always limited with detail. And then if we go beyond what the text says, we're always making suppositions or interpretation. And they're not necessarily wrong, but they're, and we need that. Sometimes I think the gospel writers didn't have a lot of detail as we would like, because then, at least this is an effect, it draws us into the text. So we start asking these questions. Well, the real miracle is that people were eating together. Well, yeah. And then someone else might say something different.
It's kind of ironic at the end of this passage, because Jesus is doing these miracles so like they will understand who he is.
Mhm.
When they understand who he is, he leaves before they can act on that.
Before they can make him king.
Yes,
Yeah.
Was
that's-
that the political, was that Roman influence there and?
Oh, yeah, well, we're gonna see this with, later on, I forget what chapter it is, but this does become political.
And that's not what he wants to be.
No, and that's why he gets killed. Or he gets executed.
but this is something I hadn't really thought about. In verses 14 and 15, it says, after the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus said, they began to say, quote, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. Then Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. And I don't remember connecting that incident with the
I agree, it all
with
stopped.
the end of the feeding of the 5,000,
Right.
yeah. So
Well,
this-
and I'd have to look, is John the only one who says that, or, and we don't really have time to do that, or do the other three gospels say that as well? But, yeah, this isn't, Jesus' plan. He's not here to be a king. He's God, he's the Messiah, so he's able to kind of go in and out. I do want to respond to Becky's comment that, and it's related to this, that he just does this and he leaves. There's no teaching moment or parable. There are no parables. And there's no Sermon on the Mount. The teaching moments are what Jesus does, and the teaching moments are the discourses that Jesus has. Because after this, they're going to ask you for a sign after he walks on water, and they're going to ask him for a sign because of the feeding of this large crowd. And this gives Jesus an opportunity to talk about how he's the bread of life. So there are teaching moments here. They're just not in parables or in the form of the Sermon on the Mount. They're in discourses between Jesus and the crowd, or Jesus and the Pharisees. The next handout I give you are going to be, there are 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John that you don't have in the other gospel. I am the bread of life. I am the
Light of the world.
I am the light of the world. I am
Good shepherd.
the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. And this is very important. We'll get to that. And these are the teachable moments. So we're looking at the signs now. They're teaching moments in and of themselves. And then that are designed to get people to believe. And then Jesus does interact with the crowd in metaphorical and, I would say, theological language.
David, in Matthew and Mark, there was no mention of crowd reaction like that. He just slipped away.
Okay,
In Luke,
thank you.
it's kind of weird.
Because it talks about how he picked up the 12, they picked up the 12 baskets. And then it says, one day, Jesus left the crowds alone to pray. Only his disciples were with him, and he asked them, oh, okay, so that's not the people, that's the disciples.
Okay.
So it's not there in the other ones.
Well, does John just simply, if the first 3 gospels tell incidences and stories, does John do more interpreting of those stories? Does he go deeper into who Jesus was other than just relating events?
Yeah.
Telling us
Mhm.
that there's more to this than
Yeah.
just the event.
He
Yeah,
certainly told us in chapter 1.
He starts out that way.
yeah. Yeah, and then, when we certainly start to get into those I am statements. And then I will be able to connect them to some of the signs, not all of the signs. So, when Jesus heals the blind man in chapter 9, right before then, and that instance in chapter 8, and then I think maybe a chapter before that, he says, I'm the light of the world. And then he heals someone.
So John kind of
Blind.
extrapolates
Yeah,
some of the thinking.
well, yeah, see, what I'm trying to say is that I think he's very careful in doing all this. It's an essay. Chapters 2 to 12, it's a unit. I have said the word Simeon is the glue that holds these chapters together. But then the I am statements will also hold these chapters together, at least 5 of them, because we'll have two I am statements. I am the fruit of the vine and I am the way, the truth, and the life occur after 12. That's fine. But there are 5 I am statements that really work in chapters 2 to 12. So I'm trying to make a case that when I say 2 to 12, that's important. John is using these chapters as is the core of the beginning of the gospel. This is Jesus' ministry, 2.5 to 3 years. And then when we get to 13, it changes. You have feet washing. Jesus is having teachable moments only with the disciples. He's talking about how I'm going to leave and all this. And the hatred of the world. The world hates me, they're going to hate you. All that stuff is in chapters 13 to 17, but chapters 2 to 12, John is using these 7 signs to be the framework. And then all this stuff in between is what you were saying, extrapolation, he's really trying to, I mean, he could have had many miracles. He has 7. He narrows it down to 7. There's also a special number in the biblical text, but he narrows it down to 7 signs, and he says all he wants to say about Jesus in these chapters, those 7 signs and the I am statements. Now, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but hopefully that's are you starting to get the importance of chapters 2 to 12?
Okay.
John.
Yeah.
You know,
Let's go
it's
back
just
and.
7 miracles. It could be more, but it's only 7, and that's it. And he does a lot with that. So let's keep going. The next sign is Jesus walking on water. Now, the word Simeon does not occur here. There's no word sign in it, but this is a miracle. This is a sign. And this story you won't find in Luke, but you do find it in Matthew 14 and in Mark 6. So the disciples get into a boat without Jesus. We don't know how that worked. It just did. They get in the boat and Jesus is off doing something else. The water became rough and the wind extremely strong. You know what a very strong wind is. So Jesus is walking on water toward the boat. The disciples are terrified, and Jesus says, "It is I." Now, I'll throw you a little bone here for what we're going to do later on. He's basically saying, "I am." That's important. He says, "I am," 47 times in the Gospel of John.
Is that a special number?
I am.
No, 47.
Oh, no, it's not. Yeah. I know you were. No, it's and not that we're aware of. It's just that's how many times it occurs. And in the other Gospels, it's just a handful. So we'll get there. But in English, just to say I am. So what do your translations say? It usually says it is I.
Yeah.
So and you could do it as that.
That's back to that discussion we had that time when class was small. That was such a rich discussion. We talked about the state of being.
Yeah.
And so he goes back to it makes so much sense to me in French, être. It's who you are, it's the state of being. So those I am statements, they're pretty simple. It's just this is, I'm the state of being. I'm God. I'm here.
And this is the verb to be. Right?
It's to be.
Yeah. I'm not gonna say to be or to not to be, but to be, and
To me, yeah, I
and
exist.
it means is. It's that verb that means is, or plural is are. I am, we are.
This is a question I probably know the answer to, but does I am, is that in other books of the Bible too?
Yeah, when we get to it, we'll talk about that because, you remember with, Moses and the burning
Okay,
bush?
so the reason I was asking that is because I was thinking that, but I'm thinking of the movie The Prince of Egypt, which I think if I remember, nobody else here saw, but because it was a cartoon movie.
Sure.
But then the bush is like, I am who I am, and then so I was like, but I don't know if that's a direct quote or if they were, you know.
No, that's it, and
You said
that's,
I am.
yeah,
That's
that's.
a Bugs Bunny. Do
Okay.
You should all watch The Prince of Egypt, though.
Okay.
Go.
That's an ancient, Israel
To your house.
precursor to, I mean, John's picking up on
Her
that.
house.
And I will give you an intro to that. Before we talk about the I am statements in John, I will look at what, the Old Testament say about that. And it doesn't use that as much. But in John, he's nuts about that phrase. It's just all over the place. But again, it's, I am, I am who I am. In Hebrew, it could be in future. I am who I will be. It's not definitive there. So anyway, the disciples are terrified but Jesus, tries to get him to calm down and says, well, it's me. It is I. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's me. And then this is something interesting, and maybe I should read it from the text itself. So he said to them, it is I, what does my footnote say? Or I am, yes. Do not be afraid. Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were moving. So it's just like they try to bring him in the boat and all of a sudden, bang, they're at the shore.
Mine says they were willing to take him into the boat, not that they wanted to.
They willingly.
Yeah, mine said then they were willing to take him into the boat and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading.
Okay,
It almost sounds like they were like in a storm and they didn't know they were really close to land and he was actually walking.
Oh,
he was walking on stones.
I never thought of that.
How did he get there?
Actually, I was thinking.
How did he get to the other side
I
of the
don't
lake?
know.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I'm just being weird.
No, but if we compare to the other stories, Matthew and Mark, and at least one of those, maybe both of them, I have to look them up again. You have this thing about Peter. Because Jesus is walking on water and then Peter gets out of the boat, he's able to walk for a while, a little while. And then he starts to become afraid and he starts to sink. We don't have that here, John. We just have, it's not about John, or it's not about Peter, it's about Jesus and people seeing. Now, this is a sign, mainly it's just for the disciples. I'm not getting any sense here from the text that the crowd, the people saw.
Whoa.
I'm wondering how big the Sea of Capernaum is, or the sea is there. Because he specifically says, you know, we rode 3 or 4 miles. And then all of a sudden, like almost a second sign is they're magically transported the rest of the distance. What would have just, it's like another sign. One is him, who he is, he's walking on water, he has this power, and secondly, this is what he does, he transports them to the shore.
Well, that's how I'm reading.
But then verses 22 through 25, it is, the people do take notice. They're like, how did you get over here?
Oh, okay.
So it is a witness or a testimony to the people.
But, well, I guess my point in what I said, I like what you're saying, is that I don't read from here that the crowd actually saw
No.
Jesus walking on water.
No, but they question, how
Yeah,
did you get over
exactly.
here?
Well, and that's good. So that is sign, well, we're almost out of time. That's sign number 5. And then the 6th sign is the healing of the blind man. It's a very long story. And then the 7th sign is the raising of Lazarus. But I do want to, in the next couple of classes, and we'll try to finish this up. Bring in some of those occurrences of Simeon as we get closer to 12, and you'll see how that word is used by John to do signs. When he do signs, that was, I don't know. At first they do, believe. Then as they try to figure out who Jesus is, they're not sure, they can't figure it out, even though he tells them. And then there's disagreement, and then in the end, I mean, the leaders want to get rid of Jesus. In the end, the crowd stops believing. That's where we're headed. And, but yeah, let's try to get through that, and then we will go on to those I am statements. Okay, see you next week. Thanks for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. See you next week.
And there we have You already got an answer.
It's just.
I wanted to.
Thank you. I'm just looking through the